Well, hello, it's Bruce Williams again, and today I want to present the seventh lecture in my series on the selected gross pathology of North American mammals. We're going to talk about diseases that are caused by arthropods. Most of these are going to be ectoparasitic diseases, but there are a couple that get inside the body that are worth talking about. But before I do that, I want to thank my friends and colleagues who provided me these fantastic pictures over the years, which allow me to put these lectures together. Let's start with some of the more common diseases you probably already know about in your domestic species, but you might not know about in mammalian species. This series of pictures is from a fantastic article published a couple of years ago in VetPath by Dr. Kevin Keel and some of the other people from the Southeastern Cooperative. And this is the presentation that you see with Demodectic mange in white-tailed deer. And you can see that there is sort of a diffuse alopecia, some erythema and scaliness and swelling of the skin here. And on cross-section, the hair follicles are markedly dilated by the presence of large numbers of Demodectic mites. And you see this in a couple of species. Goats will do the same thing. But instead of having one or two Demodectic mites within a follicle, they just have these really massive, and they tend to get filled up and rupture. Then you have pyogranulomatous inflammation, the dermatitis. But you can see how distended these are. So this is Demodectic mange in white-tailed deer. Now, a Demodectic mange, every species has it. You've got it. If you want to see some nice Demodectic mange mites, just rub your eyebrow over a glass slide and stick it under the microscope. That's a great way to see them. Usually they cause absolutely no problem. And in many species, they don't cause much of a lesion. But on the other side of that fence is sarcoptic mange. And we've looked at sarcoptic mange in the lectures of the skin in just about every species. There are over 350 species of mammals in which sarcoptic mange has been identified, including people. And in some domestic species, it is so common, prevalent, or pathogenic that they have their own species of Sarcoptes scabiei, like Sarcoptes scabiei variant suis, which you can see causing scaly lesions starting from the head and going back. In North American mammals, although certain species like this red fox that you see here is extremely prevalent in some parts of the country, they don't really have their own species of the mite. But the pathogenesis is very similar in all of these conditions. Sarcoptid mites live in the corneal epithelium. They form thick, very hyperkeratotic plaques, hair loss, and in some cases there may be an underlying dermatitis due to the antigenicity of the mite adults, nymphs, and eggs, which are all seen within cracks, fissures, and microscopically canals within these thick hyperkeratotic plates. The morphologic diagnosis would be a focally extensive hyperkeratotic and alopecic dermatitis in this. As I said, 350 mammals. You shouldn't be surprised when any mammalian species develops this. Here is an elk with sarcoptic mange or scabies, a very similar distribution. But getting back to the red fox, I live in an area with a lot of fox, and it's very common to see these scabby, very skinny, out of condition foxes in the suburbs. Because so many are affected. It really is the scourge of the red fox. So Sarcoptes scabiei in red foxes. A great picture from Corinne Davis, and this is a lynx. Lynx are beautiful cats with this lovely hair coat, gigantic feet, these tufts of hair on their ears, but this one is not, unfortunately, a beautiful specimen at all. It has tremendous crusts and thickened hyperkeratotic areas on the face and on those normally beautiful ears. This is another type of mange. This is Demodectic mange, which you see in cats domestically, often starts around the head and face, causing tremendous pruritus. Also a sarcoptid type mite, so everyone lives in the superficial corneal scale. It's very pruritic. These animals often have an angry look on their face because their faces are just crusted and bleeding, and so it starts usually around the ears and the face. And the way cats sleep, they'll curl up and put their chin on their butt right above the tail, and so the tail head is also a place where you can commonly find it. And another species that I did not know about, but this has been published, in this wonderful picture of a mongoose from Demodectic out in Hawaii, Demodectic mange in a wild mongoose, and probably it has come from a cat, maybe a feral cat or a wild cat. It's gotten into the mongoose population. It causes very similar lesions, and here is that hyperkeratotic and allopectic dermatitis with pruritus, and you can see once again over the tail head. I don't know how mongooses normally sleep, but I will bet you that this one curls up as well. So they're resting their affected chin or ear on this area, and they tend to get it in that spot as well. Demodectic cati in cats and mongoose. Now, I said there would be a couple of the of arthropod parasites that are internal. Not a whole lot. You do see nasal mites in certain species. You see nasal mites in some of our marine mammals, but these are fly larvae. And if you're familiar with sheep diseases, Estrus ovis is a common parasite of the nasal cavity, and wild ruminants have their own very similar flies, which will lay eggs in and around the nostrils. The larva will migrate up into the nasal cavity and generally come to rest somewhere in the hind part of the sinuses, near the cribriform plate, or down near the pharynx. And these are pupae of these are larvae or maggots of Cephanomyia, and Cephanomyia is a pretty common one in deer species. Cephanomyia. I'm just going to leave it at Cephanomyia. I can't tell the difference. And the instars will embed themselves in nasal mucosa, cause irritation to the animals. They will sniff and sputter, and eventually, when these animals go into the next stage, which is the pupa stage, they will turn loose and they will be snorted out or swallowed, and they go out into the ground. They pupate. They become the Cephanomyia fly. Cephanomyia and estrus generally don't eat. Once they are adults, they just reproduce and deposit eggs and die again. So it's sort of a miserable life cycle, I guess, if you are a Cephanomyia. But it's probably no fun to have these. Did you know that you can get, as a person, you can get Estrus ovis? Generally, it is conjunctival. It does not, flies, I guess they lay their eggs in the tears around the eyes of people who probably live in close conjunction with sheep. And so conjunctival infection with Estrus ovis has been documented a number of times in people. Never heard of Cephanomyia causing that. Hypoderma. There are forms of hypoderma lineatum that will affect wild ruminants as well as cattle. These parasites live in the skin. They tend to have a migration either within the esophagus or within the spinal cord, lineatum in the esophagus, and they will cause a damage to the coats. Hypoderma bovis or hypoderma lineatum, occasionally seen in wild ruminants as well. Here's a moose, and this moose is a pretty shabby looking moose, got a lot of alopecia. It is skinny, it is underweight, and this is a particular syndrome known as the ghost moose syndrome, and it's caused by infection with Dermacentor albopictus. And these animals have large numbers of these parasites on their body. They generally cause ill thrift, and the animals are so irritated that they don't eat well, they don't lose weight, and then consequently they do very poorly overwintering. So ghost, they're thin and they have very poor haircuts, known as the ghost moose syndrome. I always hate seeing these poor fawns, and these have large areas of inflammation all over their body, generally on their ventrum and on their head and on their face. And this is due to fire ant bites. Fawns tend to have a very strong instinctive behavior when their mother leaves them and she goes off to eat. They stay where they are, whether it's on the side of a road, whether it's wherever. And if it's on a fire ant nest, sometimes you will get these, they will get tremendous numbers of fire ant stings. Probably eventually have to get up and move, but this animal probably was just submitted for ill thrift or something. But when you see them covered with fire ants, you know that it's part of their instinct, and so occasionally you'll see these particular animals, especially in southern states, which have a lot of fire ants. And then finally, this is we're looking at a squirrel. This could be another rodent. This could be a rabbit. And occasionally you can see them. I've dug them out of dogs when I was in practice. But this is a large fly larva, also known as a wolf or a warble. This is the larval form of Cuterebra, a masculator, and Cuterebra is a fly that often will lay its eggs in open wounds, just little nicks or cuts, something that's exuding a little bit of fluid. In cats, this particular parasite will lay its eggs by the nostril in the midsummer, and then in the late summer or early fall, these worms have grown and they've migrated through the cribriform plate into the cranium of cats, where they cause significant damage in the area of the region of distribution of the middle cerebral artery, resulting in ischemic encephalitis, collapse of the brain, and severe unilateral or bilateral disease in the cerebrum. But in most wild animal species, you see them in the skin. They form a cyst, and normally, if they're not removed or whatever, the cyst will just sort of break open, and it will fall to the ground, and the cyst will heal. So Cuterebra emasculator, wolves, also known as warbles. And that is a quick review of the arthropod parasites of North American mammals. I hope you've enjoyed this really brief lecture, and that you'll come back for our last lecture in this particular series on all the miscellaneous diseases that I could not fit nicely into one of the categories, largely infectious, that we have talked about. So I look forward to seeing you again. Until then, good luck, great health, and be safe.